Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. This month, FreeWilliam has requested some video game design. I shall also follow a recent theme, FreeWilliam says. Design the video game that this art is for. This is the player. Here we have pictured an AI generated, I sure hope, image of a baby with 6 rotor blade drone copter apparatus around its body, and a grown man's head with a wry expression, and baby grown man tattooed legs, but still baby. That's what this is, and so what we're going to do is we're going to make a game where this is the main character. Now, I love ludonarrative dissonance as much as the next guy, so this is going to be a game illustrating the ravages of war. This is going to be a game about an armed conflict in which one side has hired a drone management company to survey the landscape. Now, this drone is equipped with several infrared and other various sensors, X-rays, ability to intercept radio waves, etc., of course, and is basically a portable logistics platform, which will be used to survey the attacked settlements that this army that hired this company is moving through. So you'll be accompanying the little armed contingent of soldiers and scouting out the area before they move into a new settlement. Follow me so far? You'll be able to scan through walls and behold the blast radius and witness some of the ravages of war from the cold, calculating perspective of these two characters. I think that either the baby head and the man head should be two artificial intelligences that converse, or the man head is from HQ and the baby head is the onboard intelligence. Because, of course, this is fully synthetic. Designed, you see, as a way to stop aggressors from destroying the drone so quickly, because it has limited defenses, as many drones do. The baby and the assertive-looking man head make it hard to have confidence when striking down this drone. That moment of hesitation is all the drone needs to fire the tranquilizing dart blowgun out of the man's mouth. They'll never see it coming. As the famous Denji from Chainsaw Man says, in a fight between men, it's nuts or nothing. And that's exactly how this bot works. So yeah, it's got a tranquilizing dart in its mouth. Fully synthetic, looks organic, but that's a mere marketing technique to give the drone an edge in battle when it encounters hostiles. Although these are probably mostly going to be civilians, and realistically it's going to be pretty bleak. For the first third of the game, that's what's going on. From time to time, you'll need to do a job. Now, let me ask you, what do you think the primary armament of this drone is? I'll give you a second to think about it. Look at the picture. That's right, it's bombs. It poops out bombs. That's correct. Very good, nice. I was thinking the same thing. It's bombs. It poops out bombs. And it's a drone. It's got to be light. There's a honeycomb chassis inside of the facade of the baby and adult head. It's mostly hollow in there. It's got to be, so it's light enough to fly. But there is a small payload of little bombs. And the organization, the company that the army has hired to bring this drone along, wants data about the effectiveness of their new armament. So a lot of what you're doing as you survey the area isn't actually keeping the armed forces that hired you safe. You will probably misreport to them that there were more hostiles in the area than there actually were, to make it seem like you're kind of doing something more than you are, when in fact, most of your purpose here is to survey the effectiveness of your bombs. I think this is mostly going to be more of a choose your own adventure or maybe I should say like choices matter kind of game. We'll get into that in a minute. But I do think there should be a sequence where the drone bombs. Maybe the player plays this. Now, you're on the ground for a lot of this game, seeing what's happened to these settlements. So it's okay if you don't see the ravages of war that you're inflicting upon this settlement when you bomb it. The player will be thinking of that. We want to make sure there's none of that detail in the bombing segment. I think that that gives the player the time to realize that they know what they're doing, even though it's abstracted, which I feel is an important point to make about war. I think that people misunderstand that the people doing the bad things are either like really cartoonishly evil, which I feel like they're mostly not, and or don't know what they're doing at all, which I feel like is also mostly not true. I feel like they do know, but it's kind of an oh kind of feeling, and there's an inevitability. You start out playing as a robot, of course, for the company. And then the bombing run thing, you survey the village that you bombed, you scan the blast radius of your explosive, send the data back. And then to send the data back, you need a little help. You go back once you break down, run out of fuel, need a rotor repaired. You go back to one of the soldiers in the company. And the game enters phase 2, depending on your performance in the previous one. It turns out that one of the soldiers is an agent planted by the company that is actually the person piloting the drone with a little controller. And for the second third of the game, you take control of that person instead, who sends the company the information and talks to the other soldiers and more directly influences that group. It gradually becomes clear throughout the choices that the player is given that this person is also manipulating the group. They're not just a fellow soldier that has been hired to manage the drone. They are, in fact, a spy or a sleeper agent that is or isn't on the side of the soldiers. May or may not be interested in them dying or simply meeting more difficulty because it means that they have to hire out more services. You can then give the soldiers hardship or make them succeed, and maybe depending on how devoted you are to each goal, it's more likely that they'll pay better. If it goes really well, maybe the company gets a bonus. If it goes really systematically poorly, maybe they pay the company more to hire more drones or more support, something like that. And so the idea here will be that you can't really change the outcome. You know, it's bad stuff is happening. It's not good. You have no control as per se, but you can kind of influence things in one way or another and see how uniquely horrible each one is. Again, a way to display the more of the systemic aspect of war's unpleasantness, not to create a cartoonishly evil edifice of the people doing the thing, but to understand the system that they are to some degree trapped in, just as we acknowledge that what they are doing is very, very bad. Indeed, we see it firsthand. Now, you might be saying, Zandy, what the hell's going on here? I thought this was a parlay about a baby copter. Why is it a game about the ravages of war? Why? And that's because of ludonarrative dissonance. This quadcopter baby, and I like saying the word quadcopter, I'm aware it's 6, with a man head in the crotch, really makes me think about ludonarrative dissonance, because that's the humor of this image, right? Is how each detail undercuts the others. I think that ludonarrative dissonance can be very powerful as long as the tone fits somehow. So for example, I can think of a lot of games. Let's think of a good example. I remember in Warframe, a lot of people were upset when more, you could say, frivolous or fantasy elements were added in, like angel wings and stuff, because they felt that it undercut the narrative impact of the game to have such relatively more whimsical cosmetics, which I don't think makes sense, because players can always just decorate themselves some weird looking way, right? But you can kind of get that. There is an impact to your character looking like they would be doing what they're doing. Personally, I think that making this purposefully initially seem to be bad can be effective. I think a lot of people say, well, it has to be tonally consistent, that's it. I think you can do this in an effective way. The ludonarrative dissonance can be jarring and can invite you into the absurdity of the world, or key the player into the fact that although this game is playing war as a straight-faced enterprise, the game knows that that's absurd and terrible and ridiculous. No one thinks that it's, in place and completely serious to have a baby manhead drone performing bombing runs in a war. Like, just looking at that, you kind of know they know that that is a little bit ridiculous. And the idea that that is a way to display dystopia and how bad it's gotten, how sick the corporation managing the company, the drones, is for decorating them this way, just to make people a bit alarmed, confused, upset, for just a split second so the drone can tranquilize them. That's messed up. And that ability to display the twisted nature of the company by making the drone look out of place is valuable, I think. That's a really useful way to create visual impact. This entire Parley response came from looking at this image, which, by the way, I still have to look at this when I remove it from here because I'm looking at the Parley while I'm talking about this. Like, I can't escape this, right? Until we're done with this Parley, I just have to look at this image. I just want you to know that. Anyway, when I looked at this image, I thought, what would be, it's obviously just silly, but this is me. So I'm going to think, what would be a type of game, a situation in a game where this would be useful, where it would be useful to have a character that looked like this for some game design purpose. And I think it's this way of using what initially seems like ludonarrative dissonance to key the player in that the game knows that this is awful or absurd. While in universe, you explain the ridiculous suggestion that this was used to make people hesitate when destroying the drone because they don't want to attack a baby or whatever. And then the drone can fire a tranquilizing dart out of the man's mouth. It's a lot. Okay, phase 2 is where we got to before. Do we have to bring this back up again? I don't think we do. Where you play as the guy who's been piloting the drone this whole time. You didn't know that the drone was being controlled by this guy the whole time. But then toward the end of Act 1, you start to run out of fuel, and one of your copters breaks, etc. One of the rotors breaks. So you've got to go back to that guy and have him fix it up. Okay. But after that comes to a close, a conclusion. It's revealed in the third of the game, the final act of the game, that the soldier that's piloting the drone is actually, of course, a cyborg who is being piloted by somebody at the HQ. And then you're sort of influencing things in your own way, kind of choose your own adventure, choices matter thing, switches to playing as the corporation. You get to go back to the base, see the company a little bit. Just talking about seeing the company a little bit elicited a yawn, the likes of which I've rarely experienced. Because it's just so relaxing to talk about playing a video game where you play as a baby manhead bombing drone. That's just so relaxing that I yawned. So I feel kind of bad about that. We're feeling a little bad about that here. The third of the game. In which it's revealed, of course, that the corporation is running both sides of the conflict and they know how to maximize the business of war by using their other drones to coordinate where conflict can be won and lost temporarily, but then it will switch, and by omitting some data. And they're just very evil. It's okay to just make someone be very evil in these situations, I think. But a lot of the individual employees, maybe the person you play as, will feel like they just have no control. Maybe this is the part of the game where the ability to influence gets taken away a little bit, and you feel like everything is futile suddenly. How can we signal that to the player better? Maybe they still have influence in very small ways, like they can get a coworker a cup of coffee when they're having a hard time, and that has some effect. So the player's gotten used to their actions having an impact. And so they have some effect on a small level, but at the meetings, the board meetings, the company meetings, they don't have much of an impact anymore. And it's a way to show the player with gameplay that in this situation, if people are willingly doing the bad thing, you can't just influence things to go a certain way. And the influencing before was happening because they were in control. You know, it's not so easy to just change people stuck in this situation. I'm not exactly a scholar on these subjects, but it is something that matters to me, and I think this is an interesting way to display that. Obviously, we've got to make sure it's still satisfying for the player. We don't have an actual game to be fiddling with while we talk about this, so I don't know how to do that. Again, making sure that choices feel impactful and it feels meaningful to interact with the world and move around is going to be a matter of getting the controls right. Personally, a detail that I want addressed is that games like this that involve a lot of just moving about the space, I often feel like the movement in these games is the weakest element where I actually feel like it should be the strongest. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In Warframe and Genshin Impact, moving around is fun to me. In Warframe, you have a lot of power when you move. That gives the player enormous mobility power, something most shooters take away. Warframe gives you a gigantic amount of. You can bounce off the walls, basically fly with your basic abilities. Genshin Impact doesn't really have a lot of movement mechanics, but I find just getting to move around the open world with relatively effortless controls pleasant. I run around for the sake of it from time to time when I play Genshin Impact. I'm using Genshin Impact because I want to emphasize that it's not that that game has any good movement mechanics necessarily. In fact, I think the stamina is a little frustrating, but just to emphasize that as long as it's effortless, you kind of want to move around the space. It's fun to manipulate a character in a virtual space. A lot of games, though, Disco Elysium is a good example. It's not that the movement is so bad, but it's not good. It's not actively good or neutral. It's just a bit annoying. It's a little bit of something to manage. You could argue that that's intentional to some extent. You don't have a ton to do. You're meant to sort of take your time. And it is reminiscent of a point-and-click adventure. You can click somewhere and go there, sure. But personally, I'm interested in the idea that it would feel cool or distinct to pilot, you know, the drone or the cyborg soldier guy, etc. And we can use a difference in how you control those different characters to highlight the fact that you have swapped. So it could be really easy and you're very quick moving when you're the drone. But then it gets different when you're the cyborg and different again when you're just a normal human doing the office work, that kind of thing. That could be a good way to highlight the differences. And again, I would at least want to try it. I'm interested in if it felt really seamless to move around while you're playing this type of game, because a lot of these games do the opposite. It's kind of a weaker element of the game's presentation. Again, in Disco Elysium, that's a complicated example because you're clicking around partially to evoke a point-and-click adventure, which it kind of is. But at the same time, I do feel like moving around with a sense of joy is good. Okay, a lot of these games also do it maybe to make the space feel smaller, which is a trick. That's a ploy, but I'm not sure one that I want to employ. I think it'd be nice to have a good amount of space for the player to move around in. In any case, a lot of it isn't going to be particularly populated. I don't think it's going to be hard to create a lot of destroyed village-scape for the player to motor around in as the quadcopter. Maybe you can switch between them. That could be a thing. Let's not bite off more than we can chew. We mostly have the skeleton of a game that you could make if you were so inclined, and you wanted to depict the systemic aspect of war and the corruption of technology corporations that create machines of war. Kind of the same thing. With a main character that looks like this. I'm not sure I have more to say. the name of the character? Is there one? Or is it just going to be a bot name, a serial number? Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you get a name early on. Hmm. Does the baby talk? What are the multiple arms for? You see that? The baby's got a right arm on this side. The baby's right. But then kind of one and a half, two left arms. The left arm elbow has fingers. Not entirely sure. Yeah. Also, what is the baby wearing? It's like a loofah or a sea anemone. I don't know. That's wild. Anyway, enough of that. I hope that you enjoyed my presentation on this new game that will definitely be coming out at some point. I know I did.